Unspoken Issues.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Unspoken Issues podcast. We are talking Grifter one-shot tonight. Joining me this evening, there's Dean Compton right over there. Unspoken Decade Extraordinaire. Dean Compton, was this your suggestion?
Yeah, it was my suggestion because I don't know. I'm not really a Wildcats guy, and I knew you two kind of like the Wildcats, but I didn't want to dive into it because every time I've ever tried to read Wildcats, they just wind up 12 times more confused than when I started. And so I was like, what if I pick something connected to the Wildcats that should be easy to get in and out of, and starring arguably like the biggest solo star from Wildcats, right. Grifter. Has a great look, connected to the early Image Comics days. Is still arguably the most popular Wildstorm character they have. Like, he just got the action figure with the McFarlane line, which I'm actually going to get, even though I don't know a ton about Grifter. He just looks really cool. So, yeah, I suggested it because you two are Wildcats marks, and I would like to know more about the Wildcats. Because, again, like I said, I've tried to read the miniseries, Wildcats trilogy. I've tried to read the Alan Moore stuff. And usually I just shake my head, and I'm like, this stuff always looks good, but I can't figure out what the fuck's going on. I called in my two biggest Wildcats buddies, and I said, explain, let's do this Grifter together, and can this be a bridge for Dean Compton to cross, a bridge over troubled water, as Simon Garfunkel would say, to Wildcats fandom for me. Aside from, I have to say this about Wildcats, they all look great. You know what I mean? Like Jim Lee, like the characters themselves, Jim Lee designed great looking. Maul looks great. Spartan may be the best looking superhero of the 90s in a lot of ways, just on pure aesthetics. You know, Voodoo, Zealot, Lord Imp, Void, they all look incredible, like, as far as designs go, but goddamn, I don't care what any of them do. So let's see what happens here. Sounds like one shot, it'll be one issue, 60 pages. Maybe this will be my bridge to Wildcats fandom.
Well, welcome back, Matthew Price. How you doing, man? Welcome back to the show, buddy. You ready to talk some Grifter tonight?
Yeah, I am. Thanks for having me back on. I am excited to speak about the most popular member of the Wild Covert Action teams.
My personal experience with Wildcats, I think I started out in the single digits.
You only went on a couple missions.
I wasn't. Yeah, that's right.
You were good about the action of the team. You weren't very covert.
Not very covert at all. Yeah. And I collected, I want to say, from issue 4 all the way into the 20s, I believe. Might have been a little bit further than that. And then I think it ended up falling off of my pull list just because of money reasons. But still, big fan. To read this book, I knew it existed, but never picked it up off the shelf. So this is my first reading.
You missed your one shot.
Apparently I did. I missed the one shot.
One shot. We're going to have them coming all day. They're
one opportunity to read all the Grifter you ever wanted.
Yeah, we'll get some more jokes in here in a few on that. Matthew Price, tell me, man, were you an early reader of the Wildcats? Tell me all about it.
Yeah, I was, at this point, I was picking up all the Image ones, and I stuck with Wildcats for quite a while, because you had Claremont come back and write a couple issues, which was a kind of a weird fit, but still fun.
Introduced his Huntsman character, I believe.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. You had the Eric Larson crossover deal, and then Alan Moore comes on, which is an interesting change up. You got James Robinson writing some, and then down the road a bit, Joe Casey does probably the definitive Wildcats over a couple different volumes. I maybe haven't read every issue of it, but saying that, if you start asking me trivia, like what planet is this guy from or whatever, I don't have any recollection. But I've read most of the issues of it over the years, one way or the other.
Okay. Yeah.
Travis Cherished also like a guy who came onto Wildcats. It was a big deal at the time. I'm a big Travis Cherished mark, so I just wanted to say that. Like, I want to say the Moore run started with him as the artist.
Yeah. When the Lobdell reboot, Travis Cherished was the first. Well, I mean, it's not as well written as the Joe Casey or the Alan Moore or even really the Brandon Choi, but it looks great.
Yeah.
Travis Cherished is drawing it, so.
Can't imagine Scott Lobdell wrote a shitty comic.
Dean has opinions.
Your take.
Dean has opinions.
I feel like I have a brand too.
Oh,
and like,
absolutely,
I have to,
sir.
Stick to the Scott Lobdell. One day I'm going to run into him, and it's
going to be awkward.
Yeah.
It's going to be very awkward.
You know,
Like,
sweep the leg.
Are you the guy that's told 8 people that I suck?
gonna be like in Karate Kid where he has to sneak out of the dance while Liddell and all his Cobra Kais are chasing you. You're dressed as a shower.
Yeah,
I think the difference is I would never ruin a joint.
Warn Emily in case.
Yeah, yeah. Let her know. So this comic drops, looks like on sale date, January 26, 1995. Big cover price, $4.95, but we're talking 48 pages here, according to Mike's Amazing World of Comics. We talked about Grifter a little bit. Dean laid out a little bit of knowledge. Created by Jim Lee and Brandon Choi. First appeared in Wildcats #1 from August of 92.
Does he have both like the worst and best secret identity of all time in superhero comics? My name is Cole Cash. What the fuck is that? But it also rules, right? Like I'm not necessarily like it's almost like Mr. Sinister to me. When I first said Mr. Sinister, I thought it was stupid as hell. But like by the kid's time, I'm like, you know what? That's pretty dope.
It grows on you.
I feel like Cole Cash is the same.
Yeah, I always dug. I mean, I dug the mask. As crazy as it looked, and or the physics that you could sit there and think of, it's just a freaking rag hanging off of his face, but it looks awesome. I mean, it's a great look.
A lot more awesome than the people who went with that look for COVID. You remember they'd have that just hanging off their face. Like, I don't know that you're pulling that off. Cole Cash definitely pulled it off, though.
Absolutely.
Well, so they should have licensed some Grifter masks during the pandemic.
Why not?
That would have been smart.
You're right. Now, the thing is, you're right. Grifter looks super cool in a group of guys that look super cool. Mm-hmm. And that's the one thing that you can't take away from the Wildcats is even if sometimes I didn't understand or even know if anything was happening, they always look cool doing it.
Yeah. He stood out. Plus, he was like, you know, in your early readings, as you're reading Wildcats, you would probably rightly assume that he doesn't have powers. He's, the guy with the guns, and he's able to, take care of business just with his weapon, Now, at some point, you guys can correct me if you know this off the top of your head, but doesn't, powers work into his backstory a little bit somehow later on down the line, or am I off on that? Because
he had powers at some point that were I don't remember if they were taken away or just suppressed, but it has to do with his training with Zealot. Oh, because they were lovers that were together. Because he was part of some I don't know if it was Team 7 or Team 6,
7.
But it was one of those guys. It was one of those teams, and he was super psychotic and everything, and he had telekinesis and telepathy, I want to say, and then it got dampened or taken away for a while anyway. Because of his training with Zealot.
And that makes sense because most of what I've read is very similar to what we get in this. Obviously, this comes out in 95. We're only...
Does that sound right to you, Matt? You read a lot more Wildcats.
I do not, again, remember what powers people had or planned. Especially in this universe, for some reason, it's like a Van Damme movie. Do I remember the plots? Was he a spy in that or a FBI?
He was definitely Van Damme. He was definitely...
No matter what, he had 2 laser.
Cool, I can tell you that much.
Okay.
And at that time, that was 90% of the battle. Do you look cool? Because if you were going to have that Image logo, you better look cool at that time.
Damn right. Well, and again, the powers aren't a thing in this book at all. His backstory, just a small little bit of backstory, 1-sentence backstory here. He's a former government operative and member of the military unit Team 7 at one point, which is involved heavily, and he gets involved with espionage. And that's a lot of what we get in this story here. It's a spy story.
Yeah, that's the way I would describe this, honestly. When I was talking to Emily about what it was about, she's like, how would what's it about? And I was like, it's basically a very loud spy story. Like if Image Comics had done a James Bond movie, James Bond comic, this is the comic you get where he talks a lot about spying, but man, is he a shitty spy.
If by spying, you mean letting everyone know what you're doing in a very loud, over-the-top way.
There's 25 explosions, and he never sneaks in and out of anywhere. None of their plans actually work. So he's a pretty shitty spy. But again, I'm not a James Bond fan, partly for that reason. But it would be, if you watched this super good James Bond spy movie and just everything he did work, it'd be kind of boring. This is basically like that. I found it to be pretty exciting, but that's the way I would describe it. I'm it's the James Bond Image comic. Well, Danger Girl, which is also sort of a James Bond Image comic.
Props here to our creative team and a little bit of history on who's hopping onto this book. Our writer is Steven T. Siegel. Started out as I was going through the rabbit hole of learning some of his work and reading some web pages, wiki, whatever I could find on the guy, one of his first books was a 6-issue story called Kafka, came out from Renegade Press in 1987. This was drawn by the Walking Dead artist Stefano Gaudiano at the time. One of the notes about this is that this comes out, I guess in 89, it gets an Eisner Award nomination, and it's the category's Best Finite Series. Now, I took this from, I think, the trade when I was looking at the back of it. And so I want to read this. It says, it would have to be an honor just to be nominated, as the Eisner was claimed by another popular miniseries of the time from 89, and that was Watchmen. So he,
in 89?
That's what it's saying. 89. In 1989, Kafka received an Eisner Award nomination in the Best Finite Series category.
Well, Watchmen started coming out in 86. I know it was late. I didn't know it was that late. I think the last issues were
collected
late.
edition, maybe?
I was going to say maybe it's the collected edition. That's probably what I would think. But no, I have no knowledge of Kafka until you brought it up today. Honestly, it's the first I'd ever heard of it until we were talking beforehand. But I know that Watchmen started in 86 because for a lot of people, 1986 is like the greatest year in comic book history. Huge part of that being the greatest comic book in history.
Right. Yeah. Rather well known. Rather.
Yeah. I've heard of it. In fact, in our house, we have what's called the Watchman clause, because I think Watchmen is a perfect piece of work. Like, there's nothing I would change about it. I give out very few 100s, but Watchmen gets one. Emily doesn't like the squid monster, but I'm like, it's a Watchmen clause. I'm like, I will brook no criticism of Watchmen. Like, other things are open to criticism. You can talk about them. Like, if you don't like something about Magnus Robot Fighter or Mayor McCheese, I love them both. I can listen to you talk a little bit, but I will brook no criticism of Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen. It's a perfect piece of work. And sometimes if I don't want to hear criticism, I'm like, hey, I'm going to Watchmen clause this right now. I don't really want to. I don't want to get into this. So in our house, we have the Watchmen clause. Feel free to adopt it.
That's lovely.
I'm like that about Dolly Parton.
Hey, I understand. Dolly Parton rules.
So it says here, while it may have lost the award, Kafka did win the attention of the decision makers of the industry. Kamiko Comics editors Bob Schreck and Diana Schultz, I pronounced that wrong, I think it's Schutz, appreciated the book enough to commission Siegel's next work, The Amazon, an eco-fable drawn by artist Tim Sale. So he goes over to Kamiko in early 89 and does a book called Amazon, and then Grendel number 40 to 1990.
Wow, the last days of the golden age of Kamiko. It's all about to fall off a cliff there.
Yeah. He drops out for a few years, then comes back for a book we talked about on here in 1994 with a Jack-O-Lantern story. We didn't talk about it in 94, but this is a book in 94 with a Jack-O-Lantern story in Justice League International Quarterly number 14.
Yep.
Yeah, he's pretty consistent writing from 1994.
Because he'll later use the Jack-O-Lantern in Primal Force. He's a primary character in that, which Primal Force is a favorite of mine. A very overlooked, really good book.
So he writes one of my favorite stories in Stormwatch number 25, which is an Images of Tomorrow crossover.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And he comes back in 94. He picks up writing duties on Sandman Mystery Theater at issue number 13. And he's on that book all the way to issue 70. And then shortly before this book that we're getting ready to talk about, he's also writing a title called Primal Force for DC. Did it roll out of 0 Hour?
Yeah, it's one of the 0 Hour spin-off titles. It goes about 13 issues. I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but Dr. Mist, who came out of the Global Guardians, essentially creates this group to deal with mystic challenges in the DC universe, almost like paraphysical challenges and stuff. The Red Tornado's there. It's a really good book. I one day we're going to cover it. We have it on the list.
Okay. Yeah, and I will tell our listeners, listen, I went back and read Steven Siegel's Kafka, and it was actually really good. If you can get your hands on it, it's a really quick read. There's a lot of panels with just art and no text, but it's a really cool story that went one way. And by the end of it, I was like, "Oh wow, I understand why it was nominated." To be honest, it's not Watchmen level, but I will say for absolutely certain, I could understand why it was nominated for this guy, and for it to be the guy's first book, really made me go, "Wow, this guy was onto something really early in his career." So
I don't know that I followed him that far back as 89. I think maybe I had missed his stuff on Amazon and Grendel, although I read some Grendel in there somewhere. I think I maybe became more aware of him later, probably on this stuff and then later on Superman. I do remember his name because it was, Steven Seagal, and it's close enough to
Steven Seagal.
They're like, okay, I remember that name. But,
when I first saw it, I can't remember what comic it was, but I was reading it, and like my mom saw it, and she was like, "Is that the Steven Seagal?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't think so."
But he does like actiony, punchy kind of stuff, at least, especially here.
Right. But I'm pretty sure that the kicking guy, not much of a comic book writer. But there's no telling. He's like third in command of Russia now, so there's no telling.
Yeah.
Like life comes at you fast.
If Ralph Macchio can be involved in Marvel Comics, oh wait a second, I'm wrong. So, all right, our pencilers, Dan Norton, which there's only 2 books according to Mike's Amazing World of Comics that he's credited for, which is interesting. It's other than this one, I should say. He's got a story in Marvel Spider-Man Unlimited #4. Just a Joe Named Guy is the name of the story. Came out in '93. And then Motorhead from Dark Horse. I don't know if you guys remember Motorhead, which spun out of
Comics Greatest World.
That's right.
He's from the Steel Harbor, I believe, like with Barbed Wire and Wolfgang.
Right.
Yeah, I remember.
So
one of my favorite superhero universes ever.
We were ready to just tear that comic apart because we were doing it in conjunction with them going to review the movie. And we get into the comic and we were really, really impressed. This was like 4 or 5 years ago when we did the comic. I'd never read it before, Barbed Wire, that is. And I was really impressed with the story. And I was like, man, if they could just turn this into a good movie. So anyway.
They didn't ask you first.
Right.
That's the problem.
That's right. Motorhead Special. He does the story on that in '94, but that's it.
I thought it was solid art. So
same here. Same here.
Yeah, very much the same. In fact, like this book gets like 2 covers.
Yeah.
And one's like the Jim Lee cover. And it looks great and everything, but you could argue that Dan Norton's was better as far as representing what was going on in the book. Obviously, Jim Lee's on some level just looks better because he's fucking Jim Lee, and everything that like he does is always going to be pretty and pristine. But like if you showed me the cover of that book, it doesn't necessarily say, "Oh, this is what you're getting." Norton's looks great, and it was like, "This is the book." Jim Lee's looked more like it was a Ghost in the Shell book.
Right. I'm looking at that cover and I'm like, "Oh, let's see who's this dame he's getting involved with." Well, as you find out in the story, there's a few dames, but he ain't getting involved with them like the way that you think it's going to happen. So, but yeah, you're right. Norton's take on it is pretty sick. So here's our inkers, inked by Chuck Gibson, Troy Hubbs, Edwin Roselle, lettered by Richard Starkings and Comic Craft, and colored by Martin Jimenez. I'm going to hop into the synopsis unless you guys have something to say, All right, here we go. Cole Cash, or Grifter, to those among the hero/spy community, has been hearing about other covert operatives being tracked down and killed. To get ahead of the murderer, Grifter has been trailing a fellow operative by the name of Polchow. When Grifter stakes out Polchow's apartment, he is attacked by a woman who is able to nearly kill him by injecting him with a specially designed poison. Barely surviving, Grifter awakens 2 days later in the home of an old enemy, the cybernetically enhanced Russian spy named Gallows. However, Gallows explains he saved Grifter, as he was following Polchow to find out who has been killing fellow spies as well. We learned that in the past, a man named Hans Arp once trained Grifter as a spy and soon took his skills to other countries that would pay him, training Gallows as well. At some point, many of the world's agencies decided Arp was a liability, sending many of Arp's students to kill him. When Grifter almost has him dead to rights, Arp dropped off of a cliff and was assumed dead. Grifter and Gallows are certain Arp has returned with new students called Widows in order to kill off other spies and corner the market on espionage. If there ain't as many spies out there, go to the people that are still alive. I guess that's the plan.
It's business.
Here you go. Now the pair look to find Arp and his widows and where his widows reside and eliminate them before they do the same. Using some trickery, they're able to follow one of the widows back to their base of operations and commence an attack. During the battle, Gallows takes a direct hit to the abdomen, separating him from his robotic lower half. And as Grifter is in the sights of one of the widows, Gallows intervenes, sacrificing himself to save Grifter. On his own, Grifter is able to take out some of the widows, nearly losing the battle to Arp's prize student, Andromeda, but he's able to overcome. Now, Grifter finds Arp, and after a blazing shootout, Arp runs out of ammo. Grifter tells Arp he needs to take him in. ARP leaps for Grifter, but ends up falling off the side of the building to his death. He really miscalculated that jump, or he did it on purpose, one or the other. Grifter heads down to view the body, but he finds ARP, I believe, but he finds that Andromeda is now missing. However, the battle is won for today. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is Grifter One Shot.
Here's what's weird right off the bat. Whenever I see the Wildcats, I obviously think X-Men. And I think of them as a very X-Men analog-esque group, for better or worse. And I always thought Grifter was the Gambit.
Okay.
That's kind of how it feels when you look at him and everything. But in this book, he talks like Wolverine. He's always like, I do this, and I'm really good, and I got trained. You can't work with anybody who's better than you or not as good as you. Otherwise, what do you need them for, or they'd abandon you? So that's not a bad thing necessarily. It was interesting to see, because, again, I think in when I was reading Wildcats, one of the problems, especially with early Wildcats, I don't think there's a lot of time for any characters to shine. So it was interesting to see Grifter all on his own. I think my favorite part of the book was though when he gets on his bullet bike, and because like I am a Final Fantasy VII mark, and Final Fantasy VII to me is the greatest video game of all time, and that motorcycle looks a lot like the motorcycle you get to ride in Final Fantasy VII while you like slice people up with your giant sword.
Oh, yeah.
And so I saw that. I was like, oh, shit, that's really cool. But, like, it's a great double-page spread, big, like, jump. Like, it's like he's Evel Knievel if Evel Knievel's bike was Cable. You know what I mean? Like, it's, like, really super and everything. It's a fun romp. You can't really take anything away from it as far as that goes. Probably like a really, really good thing to pick up if you want to know a little bit more about Grifter without getting involved in any of the deeper Wildcats, Daemonite stuff. This is just straight up what he can do, where he's from, what he's about, and how good he is at it. Nothing terrifically original happens, but nothing terrifically original has to. This would fit nicely, like if this was like an issue of Checkmate or Shield with different characters. And I mean that in a good way. You know what I mean? It's just high octane, like we're spying on each other, but mostly we're shooting each other and blowing things up. Also, they're really bad at poison in this. Like they don't know like he's like, how come you didn't die when he first gets stuck with it? It's like, oh, he didn't get stuck with enough. And then later he takes the antidote, but by the time he gets stuck with the poison in the trap again, like it's worn off some. It's like, oh, it's worn off some. Sorry about that. These guys don't know anything for spy people. And that like Dr. Wiley looking mad scientist that they talk to.
Oh yeah.
They don't know much about the old poison. But all in all, like I said, I just think I think it's a fun action pack. It is what it is how it sounds. They called it One Shot, and even though there are more than one bullet fired in this thing, it feels very much like every moment is like the only shot they're going to have to pull things off, and it's all going to come down to like one. It's all going to come down to one move, whether that's a kick or a jump or a shot from a gun. Which these guns run out of bullets, but it doesn't appear that they would take them. So that's pretty cool. Also, I wanted to ask you, Jesse, so Gallows, could he be in Cyberforce?
Oh,
is he qualified to be in Cyberforce? Because he has the cyber, you're the Cyberforce guy.
There's an argument there. Who was the cybernetic guy, the Russian operative in Soviet Super Soldiers? Do you remember the guy with the
Firefox?
Firefox. So, like, I had very big Firefox vibes from this guy, even though I think he was a little bit put together better, in my opinion. But could he be in cyber? Look, man, you got to be good. He wasn't good enough. He got killed. So,
right. Yeah,
you know,
what? You can't work with somebody who's better than you or not as good as you. You got to be equal. That's a pretty good scene, though. But like I said, I don't know that this would have been worth $5 in 1995, but it's certainly worth the $1 you'll pay for it now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You mentioned, either earlier or you may have just mentioned it now, but yeah, this is definitely a Bond comic. I mean, you got the women, you've got, you mentioned the inventor. Like, that's definitely got Q vibes all over it, which, you know, he's sitting there making these neat, and I was like, oh, what kind of neat weapons are we going to see? They really don't jump into that head first, but it's there.
But they do let Grifter, like, fucking touch that missile thing like Fast Draw has on G.I. Joe, and it, like, shoots a thing across the room. Fucking
right.
Listen, if a science guy in a science lab ever tells you not to touch something, don't touch it. Like, they meet, like this is their realm. If like the guy at the zoo is like, keep your hand back, this fucking warthog will bite it you're like, okay, whatever. But for whatever reason, when a science guy tells people not to do things, everybody's like, really? I don't know. I should hit that button.
Yeah.
I like buttons.
right. The bigger and redder, the better they are.
Grifter has absolutely zero respect for this guy right at the beginning. I remember him. I'm going to read from it here real quick. He says, "We find ourselves across town in a dump that looks like something from Mystery Science Theater 3000. Place belongs to a Weasley-looking guy named Montana. I'm about to tell him what a dumb name Montana is. And then you go and push a damn button and almost blow the place up, Grifter. Who's the dumbass here? Anyway."
Who would have pegged Cole Cash as a big MST3K guy?
That's the same. I would not have.
He's too busy having sex with supermodel waitresses that are like throwing themselves at him, asking about his dick within like 5 seconds of like meeting him. So he doesn't have time. Where does he find the MST3K time?
His dad's name was Win Cash, and his brother's name was Max Cash. So I feel like they have been on a Mystery Science Theater episode somewhere. Just with those, I mean, you know what I mean? Like those,
it fits.
Get you on MST3K.
Absolutely.
They've definitely been on a game show.
I actually feel like, even though this was better than a Mystery Science Theater thing, you could see them making this with like Rutger Hauer or Brian Bosworth as Grifter, right? And just
Brian Bosworth. Oh my gosh, man. That would be classic.
Don't get Matt started. He is the #1 Stone Cold fan in the world. Filmed in Little Rock, loves the movie.
Underrated.
It's not bad at all, it isn't. But you're right. That straight to video, like the Substitute type era.
Yeah.
Like, you could have those hits that came out of it, Wanted, Dead or Alive was, I think, the name of one of them or something, Rutger Hauer. Yeah, I could see that, this being adapted for that.
Brian Bosworth. He's the outsider on the inside. He's turning up the heat. He'll burn you. Stone Cold.
What do you think of our villain here?
I thought they were going for something with H.Arp that was gonna. I don't know why I thought that would play into it because he's Hans Arp. Well, maybe he's gonna have some type of.
He takes a gun out of his bag and off his back, and instead of it being like a gun barrel, it's like a violin. He's like, "Wow, watch this!"
So I thought they were gonna go somewhere with that, but I mean, he's sort of a trope, but it works. This
is definitely a story that now in 2023, I'm like, okay, I've seen this, I've heard this, I've read this.
Right.
This doesn't, jump onto any new train track that I've never been on before. We got the old grizzled guy that, was training him, and now he's a bad guy, and the student has to take out the teacher. A lot of different tropes in this that they feel now like, okay, yeah, I've seen this before. Doesn't make it a bad book, just like you guys were saying. It just means that, this was something in 95 that dropped, and it was a good tale.
I think around this time, this is also when movies are coming out like True Lies and Broken Arrow and Under Siege, which kind of use that same trope, where there's a guy who used to be a good guy who worked for the CIA, and for whatever reason now he's gonna nuke Alaska because he's gone the other way. So I think what you're saying is true. I mean, obviously the trope probably existed prior, but it was a trope that we got a lot of at the moment. It was very in the what people wanted, and we've seen it a ton since then, but I don't know that we saw it a ton before that. So this was just in line with that.
Those don't have a super cool motorcycle that sort of looks like an electric razor.
Right.
It's true. Remington definitely produced that one.
I feel like one of the things they were setting up, though, was Andromeda. I mentioned that in the synopsis. Right. Andromeda seems like to hold her own against Grifter. One of the fellow students now, one of the ones trained by Hans, she's gone.
Not the only one who doesn't get iced, right?
Yeah, she seems like the only one that's able to actually leave in one piece. So I feel like they're trying to set up something with that, but that's really all that this.
Well, this goes right into the book, right? Essentially, and it's the same writer. And so you've got a villain set up, and you've got, I don't know if they put Gallows back together or not. I guess you could reassemble him.
They should.
And I don't know.
I thought he was dead.
I mean, they just set up pieces that you could go back to if you're doing a series. Oh, I've got a tech guy if I need a tech thing.
Right.
And I've got, a Russian guy with intel there if I need him. And there's a lady chasing me. So there's a lot of pieces that, even though it's all kind of done in one, it spins some plates so that, and I don't know that I've ever read more than issue 2 of the ongoing Grifter, but I assume he put those out there so he could maybe circle back to them if he felt like it.
I do actually have some notes on that. So the Grifter ongoing starts up in about 4 months after this, in May of 95. Grifter's first issue actually takes place right in the middle of the Image event Wildstorm Rising.
Good old Wildstorm Rising. Man, they loved that. Remember, like, Extreme Rising?
Oh,
Rising
yeah.
was big for those guys when there was like a...
Oh, you use your company name in the events, Extreme Sacrifice.
Extreme
Prejudice. Right. Wildstorm Rising, and I can't remember I thought there was one other event that Wildstorm did. I can't remember what. But Image United, Image Shattered Image.
Right.
So yeah, you got to use that company name. The Grifter series goes 10 issues into March of 96, all written by the same writer, Steven Siegel. The series ends, but Steve isn't done with Grifter as he does
another ongoing, right?
No, he does a 2-issue crossover with a character. I'll see if you guys can guess it. Not a character. I think it was a Dark Horse character, I believe, in 1996.
Well, this might be a cheat because I might have this. Is it Grifter She?
Nope.
You're talking about? Because that is a miniseries that comes out and was pretty good, but I don't remember who wrote it.
You said it's a Dark Horse character?
I'm fairly certain. I'm going to have to look this up and double check and make sure. I don't know if it's an established Dark Horse character. I will say,
like Grifter Aliens, Grifter Predator.
It's not Grifter Badrock, although that exists, but obviously
right.
Grifter the Mask.
There you go, the Mask.
Okay, yeah. I was gonna say, it is the Mask. Yeah,
yep.
I was just going through it. I was like, Grifter X.
Who could it be, right?
Grifter Nexus. Grifter Black Cross, which actually would be good. Grifter Black Cross would be great.
2-issue crossover in 1996 with the Mask, which I bet that was off the chain. I know some of that Mask stuff I've never read, but I've seen the covers and I've heard tales. But anyway, that's kind of where Steven Siegel goes with Grifter, and I think that's it with him. I don't think he does much with Grifter after that. I know he goes on to write other stuff, but I don't think he's touched Grifter much after that, at least according to what I was seeing. So
a second ago, I didn't realize you were talking about the creator. I think Grifter gets another ongoing after this one ends, but that's what I was talking about. Just so that I make sure that everybody knows I'm not dumb.
Yeah, Dean knows what he's talking about.
That's the most important thing about these podcasts.
Last thing I want to do is have to handle them fucking emails I've been getting all the time about that shit.
Right. The other most important thing about these podcasts is when I talk about the guy with the knife from Madison Square Garden from the Carnage comics, because everybody's kind of expecting it now. You know what I mean? They want that. That's part of my brand, and they're looking for it to come out. They're like, when will he get this in? And that's when I did it. I think a lot of times, it's nice to get something that's in one book. That, everything you need, absolutely. Listen, if you never read another Grifter comic or you never read a Grifter comic before this, it really doesn't matter. Because, everything you ever needed to know about the character, 85% of it is right here. And that's part of the reason I picked it. It's it's nice to be able to get in and get out of something like Wildcats, which is, like I said, to me, it's very messy, cleanly. And I was like, well, these two guys will know it. How does it fit in with, Matt, like you said, you've read most of the Wildcats. How does it fit in with your, the Wildcats feel? Do you think this feels like a Wildcats book or its own thing?
But it kind of takes all the alien stuff out of it, which is a big part of Wildcats. It's just sort of taking so plot wise, it's a lot different, but it is kind of how Grifter acts a lot of times. He looks like Gambit, but acts like Wolverine kind of. So I think it feels like it fits in as far as that
guns
goes.
like Cable, though.
Well, and there's a lot of crazy guns that don't shoot bullets, but they run out of bullets somehow. I mean, it fits in that way, but there is a lot less alien stuff, which is always happening in Wildcats. And I mean, I would encourage, and maybe we do this as a show even at some point, talk about the Joe Casey Wildcats, because that is really cool stuff. And it's very layered and a bit meta, but that stuff is really good. It's about, the nature of superheroes, the nature of what an alien race would be like. I mean, these sort of things. Whereas
I've wanted to read it for a while. I'm a big Joe Casey one.
This is more just what if, Brian Bosworth was a spy. So.
I can't.
Brian Bosworth would not be sneaky either.
No, he wouldn't.
He
wouldn't.
Grab the guy and throw him out the window.
No. But he would be crafty because he plays the sheriff in those Fansville commercials, and that sheriff is crafty.
He is a crafty sheriff.
Howdy, Logan. Wonder if you can help me out with something.
Sure, Sheriff.
Looking for a couple of goalposts. Went missing after the big win last night.
What? That's awful. Who would steal a goalpost?
Say, that is a nice new swing set you got there.
Oh, this old thing. Well, makes the boy happy, I guess.
Interesting design.
Oh, yeah, it's Scandinavian. You know what? You should check the streakers across the street. They have a very suspicious new antenna.
Thanks for the tip.
Anytime, Sheriff.
I didn't know much about his history. So actually going into this book, I didn't know that, he had this whole spy background. I didn't know he was really in most of the stuff that I was reading, he's part of the Wildcats team. So I don't think a whole lot of light's getting shown on him as specifically. You mentioned the Eric Larson Image X month that they did. Right. And Grifter shows up at Savage Dragon. That's right.
Yeah, so Jim Lee does the Savage Dragon one, which Eric Larson did not like, to the point where he did his own number 13, I want to say.
Yes, he did.
I don't know that he hated it as much as I think as he got down the road, he's like, I want to have done all these in a row.
Right.
I'm just doing my own 13.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, I had read that he didn't like it a lot, but I mean,
he may not have also, but I think the thing he said, at least that he said in the letters page, was it started to bother me that I was not going to have a 100-issue run, or it would have this asterisk or whatever.
Right. No, that makes sense.
I'll just do my own 13.
And also too, I mean, one of the big differences when you talk about the Image guys, when you look at Spawn and Savage Dragon and Shadowhawk to an extent, you can tell that these guys had a strong idea. They had created these characters a while, had a pretty good idea of what they were and who they were going to be and where they kind of wanted to go. When you read Wildcats and Cyberforce, it seems like they were creators who needed characters more than, I don't want to say they're just shitting this out. They don't even care about the Wildcats. That's not it. It's more I've got to have a book now, and I don't have a character. Tom McFarlane made Spawn when he was in high school. Savage Dragon, it appeared originally in Graphic Fantasy number 3 in 82. He had played with these characters. Even Youngblood to an extent had some of that. And so I think that probably had something to do with him wanting to replace 13 as well, in that that was never part of this plan. It doesn't fit as neatly because that book, I mean, I don't read it, and I've never read Savage Dragon for whatever reason, but the people who have been with it since the beginning, it is apparently one big epic that is sprawled everywhere. And if you have a piece of it that's not that doesn't fit neatly, it might be better to just replace it with a piece that's more part of your vision. But like you said, the issue run too, you get to 300, which is the magic thing for an indie book, right? That's the big number. He would really be at 299.
Right. And that would stick right here.
Yeah.
He would know that shit. He would know that shit, and it would bother him.
So, Jesse, what do you think? I asked Matt, does this feel like a Wildcats book to you? Does it feel like its own thing? Because, again, you're more of a Wildcats guy than
right.
me.
Yeah, Matt hit the good point in the fact that it takes the aliens out of things, which is the very big, that's the big driving force in a lot of Wildcats, especially early on here. And at this time, probably in 95, it feels like to me, it's hey, we have one character and we want to give them the opportunity to shine, learn a little bit about this past and get us a nice launching point for this ongoing that's going to be happening. It is kind of amazing to me that this is the character. Why is Grifter the character that sticks out of all of Wildstorm? Is it about the look? Would you say it's the look? Because it certainly ain't the power set. He doesn't really stand out amongst the crowd. I was going to sit here and make an argument hey, he's he could possibly be the Punisher of the DC universe, but not really, because he doesn't have that. And plus, you've got Deathstroke and all that other stuff that's out there.
He's not cool enough to be the Punisher, let's be honest.
Okay, I'm not going to fucking go there with you.
I'm just messing. I see what you're saying. To me, the reason he's prominent in the DC universe in a way, saying a guy like Maul or Jim 13 can't be, is that he fits neatly in. DC had set up a really good array of clandestine government organization bullshit as part of what they have in Task Force X, Suicide Squad, Checkmate, Project Adam, CBI, etc. And Grifter fits right in with that in a way that, it's harder to make Mr. Majestic work in a world that has not just Superman, but also Captain Marvel and the Martian Manhunter and, and Captain Atom. So I think that may be why. But for me, when it comes to the Wildcats and Grifter in particular, y'all are wrestling fans, so you'll get this. They're very Sid Vicious.
Okay.
Sid Vicious is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. The guy doesn't cut a great promo. He's not a great worker. But by God, when he steps through the curtain, that is exactly what you think a pro wrestler should look like. And he has tremendous presence. It doesn't matter what he does so much as you just want to kind of see him do it. And I feel very similar about Grifter and the Wildcats. The Joe Casey stuff I'm just recently learning about, which is a shame because, like I said, I like him a lot. And I knew the Alan Moore run was critically acclaimed, but still very much in there. But to me, Grifter just looks like you would think a superhero spy would look. It just feels like it. It doesn't matter. He's got to do some flips. Like Sid Vicious got to do the choke slam. He's got to like jump off his bike, guns double blazing. Sid Vicious has got to do the power bomb. But outside of that, what are you looking for?
Right.
That describes pretty well the early Wildcats, probably up to the Alan Moore.
Right, exactly. That's the thing, because from then on, I think it changes. But that's what you're like, why is Grifter over? It's because that's what he would look like. Like, and honestly, we say he looks like Gambit, he feels like Gambit, but he does so without like necessarily copying Gambit. He does so it's like it's familiar, but it's different. And I think that's another reason he makes it the forefront of the DC universe. He fits neatly into things they were already doing in a way that other Wildstorm characters don't. And he has such a great look and feel about him that you can put him in there and it feels like he was always there and always should have been there. You know, Matt, you can respond to that, but that's why I think Grifter continues to be over.
Yeah, and I think probably part of the problem of integrating Wildstorm as a whole was that there's this big intergalactic war thing, and then the effects of that intergalactic war, and then if you're bringing everybody over, how much of that are you dragging with them? Whereas Grifter used to be a spy.
Right. Still is sometimes.
Simple enough.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. He does Black Ops and things like that. On the other hand, you have, you know, like I said, Mr. Majestic, you know, who's, you know, very Superman-esque. Gen 13 is crazy good, but you're already doing Young Justice and Teen Titans, and they're connected to like the shadowy government through Lynch, like Team 7 stuff. We're already doing that with your Checkmate and Suicide Squad. So where does it fit? Grifter can just fit.
And at this point, are you going to do him as a period piece? Because no kid today is going to be called grunge.
Right,
you know?
right. Also, like we would, you know, Gen 13, which was really called Gen X because they were Gen Xers or whatever, you know, like we don't really do that with generations anymore. Like now it's millennials and zennials, and like we have our own name. Like it would be called, I don't know, you know, Tinnial or whatever the fuck instead of Gen 13. So that's a really good point. You would have to like update it. And again, also like people hate to hear this, man, and I hate to say it, but you hear that, you see this, y'all are both in the Ultraverse group, and at least like once every 2 weeks, somebody shows up and it's like, why won't they bring the Ultraverse back? And if you go to the Wildstorm groups, it's like, why won't DC publish a bunch of Wildstorm books? Because nobody cares, man. I hate to tell you guys this. They won't make enough money to justify them doing it for what DC and Marvel are willing to put into those properties in this moment, especially that they already have 5,000 characters. We don't have to bring back, you know, Union. You know what I mean? Like, what do we need him for? Like, we already have like Dark Stars, Green Lantern Corps, the Controllers, Legion, you know, etc. So I think that's another thing. If something doesn't fit neatly in like Grifter can, what do we need it for? Yeah. And I don't mean to say that, like, I don't want to say that, like, I hate your superheroes, because I like Wildcats. I love the Ultraverse, but I'm also just like, I understand where these businesses are coming from. It's a world where it's tough to get a Spider-Man comic to sell like 100,000 copies. How many copies of freaking like Team 7 are you going to sell?
Right. A lot of it gets confused with, you know, they bought these characters and they're never going to use them because they don't want to. And a lot of it is like, no, it just comes down to money. It comes down to the fact that they cannot make money using those characters, or enough money, I should say. They could make some, but it's not enough. It's not enough if they could do it with another character that's already well known. Why not put your eggs in that basket?
Right.
And yeah, it's a harsh reality to kind of sit there and accept, because I want these books. I want these books with these characters in them, but I'm never going to get them. So who can I blame? The company that owns them.
It would be hard to sell. I mean, we already have, right now there are more comics than audience right now, which I guess is sort of a good problem to have, but like there's not an audience for all the comics that are coming out now. So you want to add a Ultraverse or whatever else to it. I like the Ultraverse. I think you could maybe do, and again, I don't know why they don't do something because periodically Marvel will do like, well, here's a cross-gen reprint or one-shot or something, just so that we maintain the trademarks.
Or a Marvel UK 5th week event.
Right. And I could see them doing something like that. The reason, it's a little weird to me they haven't, because I don't know if that means that somebody else could come out and do a Nightman comic, as long as it wasn't the same character. Like, are they maintaining the trademarks on those names? I'm not really sure. But that's why you usually every once in a while will see, like, wait a minute, why are they doing Creature Commandos one-shot or something? Oh, the Creature Commandos are cool. Because a lot of times they're just like, well, we're going to maintain the trademark until we come up with something we think works.
Right. Like the Eternals one shot of the 90s was specifically for that reason. And if you don't do that, you wind up with the problem Marvel had where they lost the Champions trademark to Heroic for a while, had to actually buy it back.
Or Captain Marvel can't be, the DC Shazam Captain Marvel can't be called Captain Marvel.
Right.
Right.
I see Marvel's move like, well, the whole company is Marvel. We're going to get Captain Marvel here.
Yeah, we probably should have that. I think another thing to keep in mind, and Matt, you were there for most of this as both a fan and an owner, is when people talk about DC and Wildstorm, especially in these groups, they're like, they don't care, they won't do anything. They've tried to get Wildstorm over at least 3 times that I can remember. You know what I mean? Like, where they're like, okay, we're going to do something. Here's a big event. I think the last one would have been right before Flashpoint or around that time. And it doesn't work. Like, it's not like with the Wildstorm characters in particular, DC has not tried to get it to work. It just hasn't.
And some of it has been pretty good. So you can't really even say that. I mean, I know Ellis ran into some personal problems, but his The Wildstorm mini was really pretty good. I think it was like it'd be 2 or 3 miniseries that was kind of set in its own world. Those were really pretty good. And so I've tried different things with them. And I mean, Jim Lee's the publisher, so
right.
It's not,
I mean, the Authority's going to get a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think if he thinks something's going to work, he probably would put it out there.
That's my thing. I just think it's always interesting when people are like, they don't even try. They've tried. I think DC though, honestly, has been the best as far as you compare them in Marvel. It hasn't always been neat, but they've at least tried to get the Charlton guys in. They tried to get the Fawcett guys in. They've tried to get the Wildstorm guys in.
They've had better luck than Marvel as far as
exactly. I think that like even if it hasn't always perfectly worked, we can't fault DC for not trying. They've been very willing to do this, in a way that Marvel isn't.
We just talked Grifter one shot. We did not miss our chance to blow, ladies and gentlemen. Anything left unsaid about the book, guys, before we get into plugs? Okay. All right.
I just think that I really like, this is underrated. I don't know if it's still done now because I don't read as many single issues, but you go to the final page of this thing and it is a house ad for the ongoing.
Yes.
That's how you do it. That's how you do it, because even if this wasn't your cup of tea, you can't deny that it was like a really good like opening match. Like, this is something that could get you excited if this was in your direction for that ongoing. You turn the last page, boy, that's how you do it. It's almost like an extra credit scene or something,
No shit, man.
Like, I really like that about it. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know if they still do that now or if there's even enough one-shots where that's a concern, but I do miss turning the page and then being like, oh man, there's more.
One shot wasn't enough. And then here comes the ongoing in May. That is great. It is exactly like what you were talking about. The Avengers will return. And,
I really dug that. And honestly, like I said, this bug, in 95, not necessarily worth $5. Today, it's probably going to be $1 or $2. Absolutely worth it.
I don't know. It's not worth $5 now. You pick it up, you get a whole story. It's not.
$5 now, sure.
Yeah.
$5 in 95. But $5 now, yeah, $5. I could go $5. That's $2 in 95.
Dean Compton, you first, buddy. Tell us all about the Unspoken Decade.
Yeah, we're doing 90s comics all the time. We're posting things on our Facebook, theunspoken.decade.com, where you can find some articles. I spilled soda on my keyboard, so it's hard for me to type right now, so I can't post as much as I'd like to. I got to get this fixed somehow. I'm probably just going to get a new keyboard. But that's why I'm not posting as much on the Twitter at Unspoken Decade. And we are, like I said, on Facebook. Also, I don't plug this very often, but check out Comic Book House Ads, which is a group I run on Facebook. Since we just talked about the last time, I really like that last house ad. We celebrate, the fun and zany ways that comic books have tried to get us to buy more comic books over the years. I've seen some really killer golden age stuff in there that guys have brought in, all the way up to like really recent stuff. So it's a neat time capsule. If you like seeing how comic books and how they're marketed have changed, I think you could do a lot worse than our Comic Book House Ads group.
Facebook, Comic Book House Ads. Love seeing it. Matthew Price, tell them all about what is this Substack stuff? You're going to have to tell me what in the world we got going on here. What is up here?
I'm still kind of figuring it out, but I have for the last 22 years written a newspaper column. I'm moving it to Substack. So right now it's titled like Word Balloons and Other Nerdage. It has a web address which I may or may not change, but I'm putting a link at MatthewLPrice.com at my main website, so you can find it that way if you want to. And I'm gonna just, I think, do probably weekly. Can probably continue to do a weekly-ish column about comics and other things on there. Of course, I'm also writing at my main website, MatthewLPrice.com, and then we've got Speeding Bullet Comics continues on Facebook, Facebook.com/Speeding Bullet. I think we're /Speeding Bullet Comics on Instagram. SpeedingBulletComics.com is our very old design website. And then if you want something that's been designed since the turn of the century, SBComics.com is our newer version of the website for the Speeding Bullet Comics Retail Emporium, which is here at 614 North Porter in Norman, where I'm talking to you from now, where we, sell comics to folks every week.
Beautiful. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this episode, you are catching it on the Source Material Comics feed, most likely. We have a couple shows we run here normally. That's the Unspoken Issues podcast, which you're listening to right now, focuses on 90s comics. We just had, you can go back in the archive, you could check out, airing next week, but will be aired by the time this airs, Wild Star Sky Zero. Oh, man. What fun that was. You can hear myself, Derry, and Dean try to make sense of what was 3 great issues and then a 4th one that'll just blow your mind. A lot of fun. Source Material Comics podcast. We just released our discussion, me and Mark Radulich talking Bad Weekend, Ed Brubaker's Bad Weekend. Great book. This is one of the ones where I made an executive decision, even though normally I do a synopsis. I was like, I'm not going to spoil this thing because the ending is killer and I wanted to leave it as is. So it's just a general discussion, probably about a half hour. That is the second in myself and Mark Radulich trilogy discussing some books here. And the next one that we're going to be talking about is called The Fourth Man. But that's it. So we're getting out of here. For Dean Compton, for Matthew Price, I am Jesse Starcher. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us. Unspoken Issues is part of the UnspokenDecade.com, the home for 90s comics blogs and podcasts. Unspoken Issues also has a Facebook group you can join if you are interested. Just search the Unspoken Issues podcast and request to join. All of this would not be possible without W2Mnet.com and the Radulich and Broadcasting Network, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.